कस्य कस्य प्रियं ब्रूमः स्तुमः कं कं पदे पदे कस्मै कस्मै दिशामूर्धम् कस्मादस्मत्प्रयोजनम् कस्मादस्मत्प्रयोजनम्.
Thank you for having us on the channel today. It is a real pleasure to be able to have this conversation. Parenting with purpose. Maybe a quick backdrop on why we decided to or chose to discuss this particular topic. Uh, I My name is Mittal. I live in Canada and I'm raising two young girls. I started thinking about uh, you know how I can raise them well and what kind of values and things I want to see in them uh, passed on, and how do I become a good parent. Essentially, we all know that becoming a parent is a beautiful and amazing journey, but it's also one that most of us are completely unprepared for when we get started. And so I see this as a part of my quest to become a better parent. And then one of the things that struck out to me is like, okay, because they when we had some of these conversations with my daughters, the thing that came up with them is like, hey, you know what, why are we doing anything we are doing? We are going to uh, just chill and have fun and just maximize our pleasure every day, so why should we do anything? So it's an attempt to answer that question. And I'm fortunate to have uh, the access to the wisdom of Professor Juluri, who is a dear friend and a fellow parent on the same journey. So with that context, maybe I'll quickly introduce also the organization that I spend time with. I'm today uh, working with Tech Scalers, which is a nonprofit organization that myself and my wife founded a couple of years ago. We are both passionate about education and helping other people. So a couple of years ago, we started this organization with the aim of helping underprivileged students, college and university students, with providing them job-oriented skills. And then secondly, living in Canada, we are uh, aware of many difficulties being faced by new immigrants to Canada. So we're trying to help them with mentoring and coaching and helping them integrate and start their lives on the right foot in the Canadian society. So that's the purpose of Tech Scalers. So with that, let's jump into it. And maybe the first thing that I'd like to share is a slide that, in fact, Professor Chiluri shared with me, and it is a slide on an alarming statistic, which is that the young in the US, I mean, this data is only about the US, but I'm sure it applies to many countries, including Canada and India. There is a remarkable increase starting about 2015 or so among depressive symptoms in uh, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in the US. And it is a survey on things like uh, how do they feel about themselves, how do they feel about life, and particularly there are three categories that the data is collected on, which is, for example, I can't do anything right, or my life is not useful, or I do not enjoy life. And those depressive symptoms for most of the 90s were in the 20 to 30% range among in this demographic, but starting 2015 they started skyrocketing, and today the statistics are almost 44 to 49%. And so I just wanted to ask Professor Juluri, what do you think, what are your thoughts and comments on this, and why have we seen this rapid rise among the young with these depressive symptoms?
Yeah, thank you, Mittalji, and Mittal Garu is what I call you, so I will go back to that. Um, and
Thank you.
I should first introduce you from to our viewers here very quickly in terms of our connection. Though you are from Gujarat, you lived in a very holy place, holy to Telugus, Kannadigas, South Indians, many Indians, many Hindus, and that is Mantralaya. Not many people get to
Yes.
live and work in Mantralayam, but if that's where you started your first job. So I believe Raghavendra Swami himself has chosen you and blessed you to, to do whatever it is that we're all trying to do here. So yes, thank you for that kind introduction, and I really appreciate what you're doing with tech scalers and mentoring underprivileged students, and helping them understand the challenges of migration. And in addition to that, there is, of course, the very alarming data point that you just shared, that I had sent you after seeing it on Dr. John Twenge's Twitter feed. And that has to do with the dramatic rise in depression, anxiety, sadness symptoms among American teenagers starting around 2015 or so. Now, this particular finding has been analyzed in various contexts. Um, I think most notably, a few years ago, there was a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma,
Hmm.
which painted a very gloomy picture of the impact of social media and technology on politics, on mental health, on relationships, and so on. That documentary was very well made, but I think it left a lot to be desired as well towards the end. But to go back to the issue of cause, now in the social sciences, we're often very cautious about attributing singular causes for any effect or trend that we see, so social, political, or psychological. But there are a few issues that I think are worth talking about. One, of course, is the fact that these trends are being seen soon after the arrival of this very, very pervasive, impactful, all consuming new communication technology, and that is the smartphone. Okay? So, I mean, just think about it. Around I think 2011 was when I got my first iPhone. And I don't want to exaggerate, but I used to write a book every 2, 3 years. Now I struggle to write one book every 5 or 10 years, it looks like. Anyway, that's my story. Now imagine if, you know, we are impacted so much by this powerful technology, for good or for bad. Imagine what it's doing to teenagers. So, Dr. Twenge, the first book of hers that I read was iGen, which was a study of the generation that was born late 90s, early 2000s, and was the first generation to come hit adolescence just as the smartphones were invented. So this trend that we see is, I think, naturally very specific to this particular generation in this particular time in history, and of course in the United States. But given how global technology and culture are these days, it may well be the case in other cultures and countries too. So, one possible cause that people are talking about for this is the arrival of the smartphone and social media. Uh, the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, for example, has written quite a bit on mental health, particularly for young women, what Instagram and all these
Hmm.
unrealistic images of beauty are doing to young girls. So that is one part. But there is one finding that I thought we should spend more time discussing today. Um, and this is something I noticed in Dr. Twenge's new book, Generations, which I am in the middle of reading.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I found this graph just yesterday. And this is a finding about the title of our conversation, of a word that's in the title of our conversation, and also something that you have been trying to explore with the young people you mentor through tech scalers, and that is the question of purpose. Okay. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is purpose? So, I mean, I had a vague sense when I was a kid or a teenager that purpose meant studying and getting a good job or achieving something, maybe writing books. And but uh, at this time and place in history, there is something very interesting going on in terms of purpose. Okay, so this is a graph which I will extract this pictures later so they can be edited in and our viewers can see it carefully. So this is a graph based on two sources, two important social science databases that Twench quotes. One is the American Freshman Survey, and the other is called Monitoring the Future. So each of these is has been collecting survey data. One on incoming US college freshmen, the other is on US 12th graders. So 17, 18-year-olds being asked a whole bunch of questions on their attitudes, beliefs, behavior for many, many decades now. So these two graphs ask questions about something very, very relevant to young people and to all of us as parents of young people. They are asking these young adults, what is their life goal? How do they see their life goal? Specifically, along two choices. One is financial well being, and the other is what they call purpose and meaning. Okay. So, what we find here is, and this graph goes from 1966 till 1997, 30 years. So it's covering about three generations. Yeah, at least three generational cohorts in the US. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
the boomers, the Gen X, and the millennials a little bit. So those are the generations covered. So each of these cohorts, has had very distinct experiences in growing up. Now the alarming trend here, or I don't even know. Well, I shouldn't say alarming here. I should just say the very distinct trend here is that the percentage of people who say purpose and meaning is important in life has gone down from 1966 to 97.
Wow.
The downward lines you see here, the dramatic downward line is
Mm-hmm.
the percentage of people who say that that it is important for them to have a meaning in life or a purpose in life. It's just gone down. And conversely, what you see going up,
Mm-hmm.
what you see going up here is money. So from the 60s to the 90s, year after year, you ask an average American 17 or 18-year-old, what's more important to you in life, being rich or finding a happy, or rather a purposeful life? And in 1966, for some reason, late 60s, early 70s, a lot of people said, yes, finding a purpose and meaning life is important. And every year it starts to go down. And conversely, money is important, starts to go up. So now this book, this graph stopped at
Wow.
1997, but the later book that Dr. Twenge wrote, which is iGen, brings it more recently, and I think this is true with iGen too, which is the generation which is in college now, or in late high school maybe, but mostly in college now. So I want to propose that this lack of purpose, perhaps, or lack of attention to something called purpose, might be something to think about too. That you see people saying money is more important, and they don't really need purpose or care about purpose, and at the same time, you see mental health indicators showing depression, anxiety are growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves us with the question: so what's going
Yep.
on in terms of purpose? What is it about purpose? Ultimately purpose is something that children get or negotiate from the stories the culture is telling them. So what is the sense of purpose that schools, colleges, and the
Exactly.
pop culture at large, the celebrities, the media are telling them? And what is going on there? So I'll just pause there.
Thank you. No, you touched upon so many great things, and I was writing a couple of points as you were speaking, and I was writing them down. So I wanted to maybe comment on a few things there. Uh, First is, it is so true that the impact, the social dilemma, and essentially what the tech companies have done is created dopamine addiction among everyone, including ourselves. And I have seen its impact firsthand, where the ability to focus, concentrate, and do deep work has just gone down so much, including, as you noticed in yourself, I've noticed in myself. But what's even worse is its impact among teenage. I'll give you one example. In my part of my mentoring, I'm trying to mentor my nephew, for example, who is in his late teens. And one of the assignments I gave is a standard business book, right? Like, I'm like, okay, read one book every week. And O came back and said, no, can't do it. Okay, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And he's now at a point where he's telling me that he's just finding it very difficult to
Mhm.
read any dense book. No, I mean, not even dense book, like a regular business book, right? So clearly, and I've heard this being said by other people as well, at some point we're going to look back at this and we're going to look at smartphone addiction the way we are looking at cigarette
Mhm.
smoking
Mhm.
today. Is that it has such bad, pernicious effects on your mental well-being, ability to focus and concentrate. So I completely am with you. The second thing is, a lot of times when a lot of bad things happen, people are very quick to blame social media and video games and things like that as well. So that certainly is, I do see that as a contributing factor. One of the examples you mentioned is the research on how teenage girls self image and self confidence is being impacted by social media like Instagram and stuff like that. I see that even in my kids' uh, social experiences, where 10, 11-year-old kids in their school are on Discord servers and chatting about stuff, and it starts gossiping and rumors and things like that, that people, that starts affecting people as young as 10, 11 years old. So just wanted to reemphasize those data points. uh, the third thing I wanted to emphasize, like, in the generational change that you mentioned, very interesting that in 60s and 70s, people were attaching more importance to finding meaning and purpose in life as opposed to money. And the anecdote that comes to my mind is Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs was pretty much a hippie who went to India and tried to find a purpose with Neem Karoli Baba, spent some time there, and then he came back and built this company. But that entire generation, 60s and 70s, with the social upheaval and everything that was going on in the US, I think there just was this awareness that, finding meaning and purpose is important. It was high on people's uh, things of importance. But then as the 90s and 80s rolled around and consumerism took hold, that just went, it took a back seat. Unfortunately, though, this is a great example of, again, one of the research that I have. And in fact, I have a slide that it's not in the main presentation that I shared, but it's in a different slide deck where it shows the impact of money on happiness. So if you truly, like, while people's goal has gone to, hey, I want to be rich and successful, if you look at the research on the actual impact of money on happiness, it's like this kind of a curve where obviously there's great impact of money on happiness when you're poor. So going from no income to $50,000, and this data is for the US, to $100,000, exponential rise in your happiness.
Mhm.
But then it plateaus out. And then the research shows that once you reach an income level of about 200,000 a year, the incremental impact on your personal well-being or mental well-being or happiness with money
Mhm.
is extremely small. So if you're at a point in your life where you, hopefully you're on a good professional career or whatever, you found that you're achieving the goals that you've stated and you got to that income level, now you spent all this time in getting that income level, but now you know that incremental income is not contributing incrementally to your happiness. In fact, it starts even becoming negative at some point, because with a lot of money comes a lot of stress, and you're working in these high stress jobs or professions or businesses, and then at the same time you're hitting this uh, void in your life that you don't have a meaning or purpose. What is the impact of that, right? So I just wanted to point that out and say, while people's goal is going towards more and more towards I want to be rich, the research that shows the incremental impact of money after achieving that goal on your personal happiness is negligible. So if you achieve that goal by some point in your midlife years, or 30s or 40s or 50s, you still have a whole chunk of life left where the you don't have meaning and happiness, or purpose to give you happiness anyway. So that's what I wanted to contextualize there, which then brings me to the next point, which is just when I look at my life, or generally look at everybody's life, it is sort of this very narrowly focused on my education, my career, my goals, my house, my life, and it sort of feels very, very horizontal, right? So in that context, uh, and I started thinking about this, that like how, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that, is what does that do, and is the exclusion of personal goals and sort of what seems like I'm living my life for mainly for myself and my immediate family. What does that do to us, and is that the right way or the main way that human beings have thought about the purpose of their life over the course of history, right? So this is a question that must have been dealt with many times before in history. So for example, what did our ancestors think, what was their purpose in their life, and how do you compare and contrast with what purpose today's culture is telling us should be our own in our lives, either as adults, or what is it teaching the kids today in schools about their purpose in life?
Yeah, very, very good question. Because obviously, even though uh, the youth for the last 30, 40 years have been saying that money is their most important goal and they don't really care to find a purpose in or meaning in life, uh, clearly, everybody at all ages does think about this question, and human beings have thought of this question. In the past, it could have come from philosophy or folk culture or what is sometimes called religion. um, if you want to understand what the next generation, or the generation that we might call Gen Z, or even the millennials a few years ago, what they have grown up with as a particular story or narrative about the meaning of life, it's very interesting. On the one hand, yes, you could say that there is a growing trend towards consumerism, and certainly in India, we saw it explode rather dramatically and overnight in 1991. Until 1991, our media and movies and TV did not really celebrate wealth and rich and all that. In fact, the smuggler was often.
Yeah, they don't glamorize spending money essentially.
Exactly, exactly. There was a culture of austerity as a spiritual or moral thing, and it was also practical, because I think the idea was that it was. There's a great phrase that I used in my first book: conspicuous frugality. So if you were wealthy in the 50s and 60s, conspicuous frugality. It was not considered good form to flaunt it, either because a lot of people were not wealthy, or it was just considered materialism was considered to be a bad thing. For whatever reason, and I think there were also more ancient concepts at play, like dana, for example. The idea of karma and dharma. So the more you had, the more obligation you had towards being generous.
Hmm.
So there were all those kind of older, cultural and social systems at work. 1991 in India, that changed very dramatically, because the economy opened, and a new medium, that is satellite TV, came in. So after 90s, the government and the state and the educational system, everybody started worshipping at the altar of GDP. Like, so growth is good, business is good. So, but that also meant consumerism is good, because the more you spend, it means the economy will grow. So that has not been challenged at any serious level, except by, I guess, some academics, and who, at least in the old days, the Marxists used to be principled about their opposition. Now we don't know where they've gone, but that's a different story. So 1990s onwards, definitely you see a, a, a shift towards saying, yes, money, economic well-being is the biggest purpose of life. Okay, let's hold that thought. But, and if that was the only story out there, then you could say, all right, okay, so the culture is telling kids the only thing only purpose of life is to get rich. And I know that's pretty much what a lot of parents also tell their kids, work hard, study hard, go to a good college, get a good job, make money. uh, but there is something else that is also going on. There is a discourse about purpose that children are growing up with, that you know um, we need to pay a little more attention to. And to illustrate this, I wanted to talk a little bit about this book.
Mhm.
It's called How to Be a Global Citizen. Be informed, get involved. So it's a nice paperback, colorful paperback book with a lot of graphics and photographs, and pictures of Malala and Greta and climate change. And so this was in the young adult teen section of our library, and uh, I've seen dozens of books like this in bookstores in India in the last 10 or 20 years. Um, and you go to any mall, you go to a bookshop, you're going to see books which are all about inspiring the youth to get involved, take action, change the world, and things like that. And I'm certainly in an institution which is very prides itself on social change and social justice. In fact, our university's motto used to be educating minds and hearts to change the world. That was in the early 2000s. And I don't know why later they actually changed that. They even took out education. They just said, now our logo is change the world from here.
Yeah.
So, uh, so in a sense, you can see a big change also in the sense of mission of the university, going from finding truth to just changing the
That's
world.
actually super
So earlier
interesting.
it was,
Sorry, let me just quickly pause you there because I was just looking at a bunch of logos by coincidence, and the logos I remember are, or if you look at Harvard's logo, it's Veritas, truth. That's it.
Mhm,
If and
mhm,
then
mhm.
some of the other universities I know, knowledge is power supreme was one of them. I should look these up, but
Mhm.
that's very interesting. They point out. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt that too much, but it's a great
Yeah.
observation.
Well, how
The mission of universities
yeah,
will
interesting.
change over time from either pursuit of knowledge or truth to changing the world.
Yeah, yeah, and even Harvard, I mean, they may still call it Veritas, but that is debatable.
Yeah,
And second, I mean, they are so much about historically, Harvard has been so much about massive social engineering projects,
right, right, right.
you know, and yeah, that's a different topic. So I wanted to share a couple of examples from this book, and I'll put in some send some pictures which we can look at more clearly.
Hmm.
But I'll give you a sense of how this book unfolds in terms of the contents. Okay, so there's a picture which says knowing yourself, um, and then it goes to relationships and feelings, and then it goes to this question: Are we global citizens? What is culture? And then every chapter has a celebrity section.
Hmm.
So inclusion champions, marginalized groups, and Latinos, Native Americans, Muslim refugees, um, and then it goes to the real important stuff. So this is the purpose, I guess, uh, that this is what is being taught as the main purpose across the world now in popular culture and schools, colleges, etc. It is so discrimination, ableism, women's rights. Then there's champions for women, as promised. Here is Malala's picture. Um, then there is a small section on religions, beliefs, and faith. And there's a section on racism, colorism. And there's a chapter on sexual identity, gender identity, then a chapter on what they call LGBTQ plus champions, marginalization, empowerment. So from there it goes into politics, economics, law, and then a lot of social issues. For example, there's one on refugees, and they talk about the Rohingya crisis. Um, and international law. Then, of course, it concludes with the environment and living sustainably, and things like that. Um, so, what struck me when I first flipped through this book, and then I thought it's actually worth analyzing carefully. See, as a media researcher, when I look at any media object, whether it's a book or magazine or movie or TV show, my attention goes very quickly to what is not being said. It's not only what is said and recognizing the tropes and stereotypes and patterns, but it's very often what is not said. And largely the last few months, because I've been reading and writing about intergenerational or multi-generational perspectives on social and cultural change, um, I was very interested in this question of what I have else written called, the vertical perspective. So how much of I mean, this book clearly is marketed towards a certain generation, a certain age group. Okay, let's say 12 to 20 or something, or 12 to 16, something like that. But how much is it telling them about their relationship to people older and younger than them? Okay, and that's what was completely absent in this book. In I mean, the whole book, um, you see what I've called a horizontal perspective being normalized. So most of the time, the people in the picture are young adults or people in their 20s at most, and even the things they do are about people coming together horizontally. I mean, rainbow coalitions, at the skin level, very colorful, diverse. A lot of pictures of young women in hijab and wearing different. So obviously, it's diversity, but it's always diversity at the skin level and at an in term within a certain age level. So it is giving them talking about purpose to them without a sense of their location in time, their relationship with generations that have come before, the relationship with generations that come after. In this whole book, the only image I think I found of young, older and younger people interacting, there's one picture, one illustration, which shows an old man in a wheelchair being pushed around by a young
Wow.
person, saying, "Oh, it's good to serve the elderly." Okay,
Oh my God.
so, I mean, look at the objectification, okay? And I'm not sure I saw a picture of a baby or a toddler, or two or younger and older siblings together anywhere. And see, because in nature, in pre-modern times, until at least 2 3 generations ago, typically human beings grew up experiencing the flow of society and culture and nature and time through people older than them and younger than them. Okay,
Yeah,
so
like they say, it takes a village to raise a child.
exactly. So now they've chopped off the head and tail of the village. So this is a
There is no
caricature.
village.
There is no village. This is a caricature of a village, because in a village, y- I mean, the important thing about the village is the elder, right? And here, the only image you have of an elder in this book is a objectified stereotype of a guy being pushed around on a wheelchair. So I found this book very interesting in terms of uh, what it is excluding, what it is normalizing, and perhaps um, uh, telling. I mean, and perhaps being a cause of the kind of symptoms we talked about earlier, right? Rising depression.
Hmm.
Maybe one of the reasons a lot of young people say money is their only purpose is because, as much as this story about purpose is being rammed down, and as much as people want to agree, of course, yeah, we do respect diversity, we want equality, we want human rights, we don't want immigrants to feel bad. I mean, all of this is good stuff. But I think young people somewhere deep down are being cheated, you know, by
Hmm.
this kind of a narrative, a monolithic narrative, where they're not being allowed to see a representation of themselves as human beings, as the way it has always been, where You negotiate your place with older generations, younger generations. So what happens then is, when you're growing up, when you're say 15 to 25, um, you may be worried mostly about studies and job and financial security, understandable. But then you also grow up, you typically in earlier times, people grew up with a sense of what they were going to do afterwards, you know, and now that has been severed. So what has happened is,
Exactly.
you have people who really don't know. I mean, so they say, okay, money is the only purpose, and even there the story has changed. While you were talking about the that very important data point you mentioned earlier, about the other study which proved that after a point, having more money doesn't necessarily make you more happy. I mean, it's certainly vital up to a certain point. I think you mentioned $200,000 or something like that, and after that, the way money is represented in movies and popular culture has also changed. In Indian movies, for example, post 90s, you started seeing a different narrative about money. The kind of numbers that were mentioned, in Bollywood movies, earlier in the older movies,
Hmm.
they would just say somebody was rich and had a big car or a big house,
Right.
something like. Now they mention numbers as, oh, he's worth 10,000 crores, he's worth 1 lakh crores. So there is this kind of insanity about money, and certainly in India, that seems to be the main thing. So to sort of look at what we have, we started out with this effect of depression and anxiety and lack of purpose, and what is going on. So we have a um, very abnormal and propagandistic discourse of purpose being put out here, where people are taught to think of
Right.
themselves only within their age group or generation. And then the broader thing is, yes, this sort of abnormal attitude towards money and material well-being as well.
Yeah.
There's
So
more there.
maybe this is a fascinating point you made, and I want to explore that a little bit deeper and also make a couple of comments, right? Like, first of all, of course, generationally speaking, this generation is growing in a much more secure and materially comfortable environment compared to, say, the last one or the previous generation before them. Um, and that reminds me that, just like, in management, they speak of Western books, they speak of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You meet your basic needs, which, by the way, was, when I really looked at it, a lot of that was work done by Marsha Arbindo many years before Maslow's thing came out in the Western um, literature. So I'm assuming that's some kind of inspiration, or I don't know if that was independent or not. Anyway, the point is, as human beings, we certainly know that, and especially after your basic needs are met and you're feeling little, living in a relatively secure and materially comfortable life, you will look for purpose.
Mhm.
So very clearly, the young adults, and especially because the young adults, the other thing is they're maturing very fast, definitely maturing earlier compared to, I recall maturing myself, personally, intellectually, mentally, and therefore they're going to start asking for purpose earlier on in their life, right? And it is fascinating to me that you observe that essentially what used to give people purpose, or as people were growing up, family, elders, traditions, extended family, right? Uncles, aunts, nephews, nieces, uh, the sort of the village, is just being completely airbrushed out of the kind of book that you mentioned. But also, now that I think about it, look at the kind of movies they watch. Look at, sort of the Disney productions, or the Pixar productions, or whatever it is that the young adults read these days or watch in movies. Whether you took it, like the Frozen movie, for example, Disney's Frozen movie. It's about two young girls and a young guy and whatever. Uh, and what I find is, and again, this is, I want to emphasize that what we are seeing is not just in the kind of books that you see in the library. This is actually part of the curriculum that is being taught in in as early as grade 4, grade 5, at least in Canada here, and I'm sure that is the same in the United States. And like I said, again, I want to be very clear. Issues of racism, diversity, sexual identity are extremely important for the society, and People from diverse backgrounds, whether it's racial or sexual or whoever, have suffered enormously over the years, and clearly their rights as humans are very important. They continue to be ongoing struggles, particularly in the United States, where we've seen, with the conservative court decisions, some of these rights are actually being taken away from people that they had for a generation. So certainly not to minimize that, right? But what I find fascinating is this very airbrushed, very sort of narrowly, as you describe, monolithic focus on uh, diversity within a certain box, or whether it's of sexual identity or racial diversity or some of the other climate change or these kind of cultural political issues that are uh, being so focused on today in the schools. And like in my kids school, there's a pride week, and this is, I'm talking about kids whose school is grade 5 to grade 12, right? And so grade 5, grade 6 kids are being taught about this stuff, right? Now, it's great. I'm all happy that there's a Pride Day, Pride Week, and that we are celebrating the diversity in our culture and from people from all kind of LGBT plus backgrounds, and very deservedly so. I mean, given all the persecution they've suffered, particularly in North America. What it does make me think, though, is what is not being said. Like, okay, where is the grandparents' storytelling celebration day?
Hmm.
Okay, uh, where is the understanding of my culture and where it comes from and celebrating my festival? Say now, superficially, there's always, the culture again here has grown more inclusive. There are people in my kids' school, there's happy Ramazan Eid day, there's a happy Diwali day, given just the diverse population of students they serve, right? Uh, but how truly deep and uh, that understanding is, and are they spending time on focus on developing that aspect of their identity, uh, at the compared to the things that are they're spending time on other stuff, right? So I want to hear your perspective on what does the this narrow and exclusive focus on certain forms uh, of the I guess, for the lack of a better term, on the identity spectrum or the interest spectrum that's being focused on, as opposed to what we know to be a much broader, deeper, and richer part of one's identity and a social, personal, family context that's being completely left out and missed out. So maybe if you can share your thoughts on that, and particularly with your very interesting insight on intergenerational dynamic there.
Yeah, so clearly, I think what is going on is, there is a tremendous amount of trafficking in identities that is going on, and this is, I mean, I'm somebody who was trained in critical theory, and what I teach is called critical cultural studies, and by critical, you know, we mean that we are committed to a critique of power and injustice and oppression and all these things. But what has happened, I think, in the last few years, particularly, is the appropriation of this terminology and these concerns and their commodification by the very institutions that 20, 30 years ago my peers in the left wing Marxist academia would have been condemning. So the corporates have taken over these themes or these concerns as marketing strategies. And from what I've seen in my research on the history of propaganda, it's not just commercial marketing that is a concern here, but there is much more dramatic issues of manipulation and brainwashing and um, you know uh, destruction of human beings, freedom and ability
So
to
there is
function.
almost like political, insidious political marketing along with
Exactly.
propagation of this agenda. Is that a right way to think about it?
Yeah, and by political, it's not just one party or the other, though sometimes that may also be the case. By political, what we mean is uh, leaving human beings bereft of an understanding of where they've come from, where they're going, so that they can be easily controlled, manipulated, turned into zombies, either consuming zombies or working zombies or sloganeering
or,
zombies.
or raging zombies for a certain cause that is near and dear to the political establishment.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, raging zombies is, yeah, because this has become very unfortunate because, I mean, young people t- do tend to be, they should be encouraged to be idealistic and change the world and so on and so forth. And I th- I think what has happened in the last 10 or 20 years is that uh, it's very interesting. Dr. Twenge's previous book before iGen was called um, the Narcissism Generation or something like that. It was something. It was about narcissism, and in a very
Mhm.
very clinical, scientific, psychological perspective, she talked about how in the 90s and 2000s there was an outbreak of narcissism in schools and culture because that's how people were being trained to become.
Mhm.
And immediately after that, you have now, that sort of merging into this new kind of a trend of defining one's purpose in terms of wanting to change the world. So I think, some of us who are older might remember different ideas, like you mentioned Maharishi Aurobindo, and I think in my childhood Mahatma Gandhi was much more of a
Mhm.
much less critique figure. And Gandhi too, in a sense, in his time and place, was a good example of somebody who had this idea of changing the world but also changing yourself. I mean, the self and the inner
Mhm.
and outer world was seen as interconnected. So
Right.
all these things are going out. So now we have a very superficial, cosmetic level of social justice and revolution, being bandied about. But as you
Mhm.
said, yes, I mean, the human rights part of it is important. That no human being should suffer because of who they are. But at the same time, when you see that the suffering of some people is sort of used to cause more suffering to some other people, and including the people who are supposedly being helped sometimes, you see all of this is very very messed up. So one way I think to just think about it, and this is where I think I would particularly urge Indian parents to take more interest, because many Indian parents are in engineering or STEM, business, finance, etc., is to start paying more attention to the works that are going on, the debates that are going on in the social sciences, because the social sciences is where social engineering begins. Okay, the social sciences departments in the West are where your future, your reality in India tomorrow is going to come from. And I think a lot of people in India don't realize it, including the Indian Americans here who live in the bubble. And I'm sure it's Indian Canadians too. I think a lot of the IIT, engineering, MBA, big money type people um, have this assumption that, you know, the humanities and Jolawalas are insignificant because that's what they saw in India 50, 60 years ago. But what they don't understand right now is the way the levers of the world are working together. So you have the powerful institutions like the military, the intelligence agencies, the corporates, and then you have the target groups, which are populations which they want to convert into markets or zombies, as you said, and in between are the social science departments. And because a lot has changed here, because 30, 40 years ago social science departments were very idealistic. They were very clear in their understanding that, hey, we are here to educate our children to recognize who drives the world, to recognize that the military industrial complex is is a very very important reality. It's not a conspiracy theory that the US keeps going to war after war, because of the way the media, the political structure, the economics are all interconnected. And the last 10 years, even in academia, that's starting to go out. So I'll give one small anecdotal example. 1960s, when the Vietnam War took place, and I tell my students this, you had the two biggest institutions for education, awareness, and culture in the country, the media and the colleges, question the government's narrative about the war. Okay, so the anti-Vietnam War movement burst out in universities, and the press, played a commendable role in questioning and eventually challenging, the Lyndon Johnson and then the Nixon government, and ending the war, because that's how it was then. By the time of the next big unnecessary war based on lies, which was the 2003 Iraq War, the media was completely co-opted, right? So you had CNN, NBC, Fox, everybody in the New York Times, happily going along with it.
I distinctly remember the New York Times unquestioningly putting Colin Powell's testimony on the front page.
Exactly. But I still remember from in the days after 9/11, our university actually had a huge debate. And among faculty, we had teach-ins, we had huge anti-war protests in San Francisco. So from 2003, so by the time by early 2000s, you see the anti-war component has one arm has been chopped off, which is the media. The media is now completely co-opted, but the universities still have enough people who are questioning this. Now, in the 2020s, right? Whatever is going on in the world today, you don't see anything being questioned in the universities. Okay,
Right.
in terms of foreign
Incredible.
interventions, that's it. Whatever the whatever is said in the paper, the universities, there's total convergence now. So
Wow.
yeah, so in a sense, if you're able to have conversations like these, with people younger than you, and again, as be age appropriate, one shouldn't be too pessimistic, um, you know uh, about these things, but I think it is important to equip children with that kind of social science, political awareness as well.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next question. I did want to explore a little bit deeper what you said about, again, particularly raising children as Indian Canadians in a society, and particularly out, I would say a society that has a very checkered past with immigrants generally. I mean, there's a history of massive racism in Canada, including against, Indians who came to Canada many years ago. Uh, what I want to explore this little bit of your idea of like Indian parents should understand the importance of learning social science, history, particular context, and realize that, for example, what is being taught in the West is it comes from a particular context of the Western way of looking at themselves, which we may not be familiar with. How what we grew up with, or the assumption that we grew up with, given the social political context that we grew up in. Give me a little bit more and explain to lay parents like me who are not steeped into critical studies and social sciences and understanding media and analyzing them the way you are, about the importance of learning and understanding social sciences and how they're being taught to our kids in school, and what does it mean for the future. I mean, what are our kids going to grow up into with the kind of programming that is being, uh, you know, that they're being subjected to in schools? And is that a good thing, bad thing? How should we analyze, understand it, and deal with it or counter it if needed?
Okay, let me separate two components to what you said. One is social science, and the other is what you call programming in schools. I think the Indian American community a, has a completely misplaced and self-destructive and counterproductive sense of alarm when it comes to social sciences and humanities today, because there is a sense that somehow, you know the children are being brainwashed by social sciences, and somehow by sending them into STEM, they're going to be protected from it. I think that is such a cop out, and that is completely self-defeating. Okay? This is The problem is not in the social sciences or with social sciences. This book, these are not social sciences. This is caricature. This is propaganda. This is Go back to what I just told you. This is part of the colonization of the academy. Okay, so I'm not saying the universities, higher education, particularly social sciences, particularly psychology, has always had a very checkered history. It's been very complicit in wars and manipulation, and very, very repressive and ugly stuff. Okay, but there have also been moments where there has been pushback to this inside these institutions. Okay, and the mistake I think the Indian community is making, the Indian diaspora is making right now in the last 10, 20 years, is that one, it seems to think that all these lies are coming out of people who have not become engineers and doctors like them, and their children need to be shielded by them, and they're shooting themselves in the foot. So they're not reading. They're not realizing that 90% perhaps of the people in social sciences, whether it's Dr. Twenge or Haidt or many other people, are not sitting there just to say bad things about Hinduism and India. Okay, right? They're doing their own stuff. Some of it is very useful. Some of it is very, very useful for us. And there are a handful of, even South Asia studies or India experts inside humanities and social sciences, not a whole lot, but people who are trying to speak for us. And it's very important to learn from them and to inform them and to dialogue with them, because what is going on right now is that, um, you know, there is no Indian social science. Okay, that is the core problem. There is no social science or humanities to explain the world to the next generation of Indians coming from an Indian experience. Okay, and again, as I said, there's just a handful of people whose work can lay the foundation for it. So inside academia, for example, S.N. Balagangadhara's book, as others see us, along with Twenge's generations, this book has been very useful in helping me propose and build this idea of a vertical, multi generational approach. I think this is a very useful book to read. So, putting everything together to answer your question, I think what parents should be aware of is very simply this: uh, try to perceive your children's lives not in terms of you simply repeating the roles you have copied from your parents. Okay, what did my parents do to me? What should I do to them to make sure that they study hard, get good jobs, and settle down? How much should I be liberal? How much should I be strict? So we're all without social science, without an Indian social science view of the world. We're groping in the dark here. We're just imitating each other. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So one thing that does seem to work well in terms of economic well-being, well, the diaspora seems to do well. A lot of the families make sure their kids get good marks and go into very good colleges and get good jobs. But in terms of purpose, in terms of happiness, in terms of uh, who they are, who they're going to become, there is a problem because they are growing up under duress. I mean, all human beings are growing up under duress in this media age. That's a fact. There is a tremendous amount of propaganda and manipulation coming in through social media, and for the children or the families of a part of the world where vertical cultural memories and legacies have not fully been erased yet, unlike the rest of the planet. That trauma is proving, I think, to be very, very difficult. People are not sure how to respond to
Mhm.
it. Many people are responding to it by just adjusting, because that's kind of what we were told to do by our parents, and that's what we tell our kids too: just adjust. So um, and that's an easy way out, because if you don't really do the work, as the activists say these days, it's easy to just adjust. Whatever, I'll give you an example. In California, as you know, there's a big controversy going on about a bill that supposedly is going to outlaw caste discrimination. And you know a lot of Indian Americans, were opposing it. Then, they were complaining that the politician they had voted for had betrayed them and was not even listening to them. And then 1 week later, they go to Washington and they're boasting and saying, "Yeah, Modi is here. Look at us, Indians are so powerful." Now, again, they're back to California saying nobody's listening to us. And I noticed a very interesting thing going on. Some of the Indian American parents are already adjusting to it, right? They say things like, If it's going to ban caste discrimination, why should we oppose it? You know, and then you have to tell them like, no, but this is the track record of the premises on which caste discrimination arguments were made. The Cisco case was thrown out. There was no evidence there. People are saying like, if you celebrate Holi, that is casteist. So unless you wear black and reject Holi because it is allegedly being done to celebrate the burning of a Dalit woman by a Brahmin priest, you know, you're casteist. If you pat somebody on the back or you serve only vegetarian meals, you're being casteist. So those are the kind of examples that have been tossed around in the run up to this legislation. So unless people have those facts and the perspectives and the arguments, it becomes easy to just say, oh yeah, of course we support banning caste. So that is what is going on. I think this kind of adjustment that we keep doing without taking a stand is proving to be very, very deleterious. So, to help us get a sense of how, to help us just do the work in terms of developing a perspective that goes over time, cultivating a vertical approach, um, I think by becoming more self aware of who we are as a generational cohort, where the stories we believe in have come from, and where the stories that our children are growing with are coming from. And by stories, I don't mean just the Puranas and those beautiful divine stories, but also the stories about politics, stories about society, and so on. Um, we can start to create a very important thing, which I'm writing about regularly these days, and that is intergenerational empathy. Okay, so if we start to understand that, hey, our children are growing up in a time where there's more horizontal coercion on them. When they go to school, their children are going to tell them, hey, you're wearing a bindi. Don't you know that is going to make minority women feel bad or oppressed? you know so those things are happening. So you have to be able to tell them, look, we live in a society where there's more and more tools of persuasion and manipulation at play. We have to understand the history of propaganda. Then, of course, we also have to understand the cultural history of where we have come from, how our ancestors chose to fight rather than, erase their symbols or abandon their holy lands, um, and tell more stories about our past. So I think the more people understand that each of us lives in a vertical village rather than this caricatured horizontal so-called global village that we don't that doesn't really exist. uh, the more people think that, hey, I'm a part of a village, I'm a part of a village which began 3 generations ago, in Gujarat or in Andhra or Tamil Nadu or Karnataka, and this village is still in me, in the food I eat, in the mother tongue I speak, in the gods my parents or my elders worship. So as the more we draw our attention within the family to a vertical sensibility, the more we begin to understand who we are. And 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 I don't think we have to reject this modern human rights diversity thing. We'll just know how to keep it in its place, and we'll reject the manipulation, the insincere, the fake part of it. Okay?
Right.
So
So, which is kind of, you mentioned the second part of my question was how it's being, it's translating social sciences academically are being translated into, curriculums in schools and what's being taught to students through books like the one that you published. So, yes, we're not rejecting, to be clear, we're not rejecting human rights of anybody or anybody who has been oppressed for whatever reasons and continues to be oppressed in the society today. But we need to also have the intellectual tools to counter the interventionist agenda that is particularly targeted at certain groups. And I would consider among them, or I would say rather, learning from you, that definitely Indian Americans are part of that interventionist agenda of whatever prevailing political ideology is, whether that's through academia or politics or economics or media or whatever it is that is going on. Uh, so then, you know, now is that correct way of thinking about it? That yes to progress and respect for human rights, uh, but no to interventionist agenda that is very selective in terms of what it chooses to focus on, making it in fact more inclusive, to include our own experiences, our own lived experiences, defining the valid, not being able to speak for ourselves, and as part of people that have been historically colonized, genocided, and so on and so forth, right? So is that the right way to think about it? Is that yes to progressive movement, but making it more inclusive to have our own voices heard and telling our own stories to our own children, not ceding that authority to somebody who has an interventionist agenda, so to speak.
Well, so I'll try to answer this again from the perspective of a vertical, horizontal framework, because
Mhm.
I'm trying to cultivate it and apply it as we go along. The interventionist component, in a way, is not. I mean, definitely, as I said, I agree with you. We are facing it as Indians in the diaspora a lot more, but what we are facing is also being faced by others in different ways. And the core issue about the intervention here is on breaking intergenerational continuity. Okay,
Wow, okay.
so what is happening right now in terms of the propaganda between, uh, say, your our generation and the next one, and is a replication of what happened, say, in other parts of the world centuries ago. Okay, and now many centuries ago it was more explicit because it was taking place in the form of a religious conversion. So in retrospect, it's always easy.
Yeah, or racism and colonization.
Yeah. So it was always, colonization. From Todorov writes in the Discovery of America that one of the first things that the missionaries who came along, with the Spanish did was to, befriend the natives and say, "We'll educate your children." And what they did was to basically start, um, you know, manipulating the children to uh, turn against the parents. And they were also using the children as hostages. Every time something went wrong, they would use their children as hostages. So, I think this um, tendency to break intergenerational continuity is the mark of any totalitarian society, even a superficially democratic one, or rather a propagandistic society, because propaganda works best when people's memories are erased, right? Like in George Orwell's 1984, which is actually a great book.
Amazing.
We should discuss at length in the future, perhaps. Once memory is erased, you can say anything you want. Today you can say this, tomorrow
Or replace them with new memories that you choose,
exactly like
or
Inception.
or the
Put in memory.
the powerful choose that somebody else is choosing for you to have those memories, so they want to supplant the ones that you traditionally were handed down, and replace them with the ones that they think you should have.
Exactly. So I want to conclude with a story about an image, because I just remembered it this morning. I couldn't find it anywhere, but perhaps we can
Mhm.
find it on Google and I'll share it later. So an image, a childhood memory, okay? And I want us to think of that image, and then, an image from say a book like this, where, the whole, so today I think when a child thinks of purpose, they think of an image like maybe like this, right? The whole world,
Mhm.
everybody holding hands, right? So
Yeah.
this is the sense of identity, model of identity and belonging and life that is being imprinted. um,
Mhm.
and of course, it's at a superficial level, it's sweet, it's nice. Okay, in your classroom you'll find children with of different skin colors and costumes and languages, embrace everybody. That's a beautiful thought. But the problem is, does this give a purpose to a human being for the entirety of their life? It doesn't. You know what does? And this is an image I remember seeing when I was about 8 or 9 years old. A group of monks from the Hare Krishna temple that had just opened in Hyderabad had come home. Um, and first I must give you a media diversion. They came with a suitcase and they opened the suitcase. It had a small TV and a video player in it. So that was probably the first time I saw a portable, this was even before VCRs were invented. Okay, so these Hare Krishna guys had it. So 1978, 79. But they gave us a bunch of books. And I remember one of the books they gave us, I think it was the Bhagavatam. It had beautiful pictures. The ISKCON books really are beautifully illustrated. And there is one picture which scared me. I'll admit it scared me. It shows not the whole world with everybody's, like this. It shows the life cycle of a soul. Okay. So it
Wow.
starts with a baby, then the baby is crawling. It's like a circle: baby crawling, a small boy, a teenager, a young man, middle age, old, decrepit, dead. And all through that, what is there? There is this spark, like the Atma going through all these life stages. And above that, Krishna and Radha are playing. So imagine an image like that is teaching you that you know this is the life cycle. This is what every single human being. So even when you look at this, it's a small world planet, and you see everybody standing together like this, that is a static picture. That's a horizontally constrained perspective. But when you think of the life cycle, every human being in the world has this life cycle. So that is the Sanatana of Sanatana Dharma, I think. And that
Hmm.
is now coming into interaction with the horizontal bias, the YOLO, or you only live once bias of the Western social science paradigm, which, as Balagangadhar says, is just secularized theology. So I think what is happening in conversations like this, and what I think, parents can do in conversations with their young, is to sanatanize the sociological perspective, because there is no other way.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. No, thank you. This is such an amazing conversation, and I want to make sure that that everybody watching this understands the relevance of this is not only to Indian Americans or Indian Canadians raising their kids uh, in the diaspora. This is probably even more relevant to Indian parents in India, given the onslaught of westernization that society is going through, and these topic is just as relevant to every parent there. So uh, I, amazing insights, and I want to maybe wrap this up and maybe summarize. And you might have already covered some of this earlier, but if I were to ask you to bring it back to the original reason why we started this, which is the purpose,
Mm.
parenting with purpose and helping children find purpose in life. Uh, Sum it up for me in terms of how do we combine this intergenerational vertical living idea with uh, the the topic as a parent of providing purpose to our children. That's one. And secondly, I'm actually very curious to learn about what did our ancestors think about having purpose in life or giving their children purpose, because this, now that you and I think about this as parents, this cannot be a new question. This must have been something that people have pondered over for thousands and thousands of years and have um, you know uh, come up with at least something. So let me ask you that. Maybe that's our last question: is A, what did our ancestors think about finding purpose and giving it to their children? And B, how can we use this intergenerational vertical framework to give purpose to our children
Okay.
today? Mhm.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think, as Bal Gangadhar says in that book, in a sense, our ancestors were not this obsessed about worldview and ideology, and of course seeking to impose this worldview on others. So in a sense, this idea of one size fits all purpose for everybody, you know which today could be like social justice and changing the world, or saving it from injustice, which 50 years ago was still, saving the world for Christ, or saving the world for, you know whatever, to fit into a certain theology, a certain uh, story that they had. um, we typically polytheistic indigenous societies, which is a whole planet, you know uh, till a few generations ago, they don't have that. Okay. So what was the purpose? Why did people have purposeless lives? No, I think they did have purpose because, one, it wasn't necessarily uh, you know made to fit into a theory. The way the purpose flowed was in terms of your place in nature, in the natural flow of time, which is life stages. So I think what is very important is to encourage a sense of awareness among children and parents about where we are in our life journeys, spontaneously. When you're a new parent and your children are small, I think that is the most beautiful time. It happens very, very spontaneously. It's sheer joy. And then also it happens when one starts losing their parents, right? I mean, when like I lost my father about a decade ago and my mother just a few months ago. So that too is a very, very difficult time. And I do my best to honor the rituals now because I think it's very important. When I was growing up, my father never took me to when he went to do his annual ceremony for his father. And I always grew up with this sense that this was all very dark and morbid, and I didn't want to think about it. And being I guess a somewhat modern liberal guy, he didn't want to impose or force it. Maybe he wanted me to find that meaning for myself. But I kind of now talk about these things and make it a big part of organizing the things. And like the priest in our temple was saying, not a lot of people do the monthly pujas, because they're very busy or whatever. I try to do it because I think this is my purpose now. My purpose for at this moment is really very much to perform these rituals, and and then of course the other smaller rituals like daily puja and all the other things. So I think what our ancestors did was to tune uh, our awareness of being in time, of going through time, with practice, with certain practices. And I think children learned that. And, in a sense, it gave them an awareness of where they were in life and where they would be going. Now, unfortunately, the challenge is that a different kind of ideology has completely changed uh, how we view our own journey through life. And I think the first thing to question is where this ideology has come from, to question this assumption that the whole world is we are part of this global journey from a savage past into a utopian future where there'll be social justice and equality for all and things like that. I think there can be a decent and better life for all. But the people who are talking about it, the forces and interests which are promising utopia now, are the people who are destroying with each passing day any chance of utopia. They're trying to create a zombified version of utopia that will, so I think the practice of life stage rituals is very important, and the questioning of assumptions about society today is very important. And and for that questioning, again, I think it's important to recognize our limitations and just say many of us are not trained in social sciences, and we don't have an indigenous social science right now. Maybe we had it a long time ago, but our ancestors rather wisely focused on other things. So, I think for the generation of parents today, if you want purpose, well, first, if you want to parent with purpose, I think you have to find parenting as a purpose, right? So you have to
Amazing.
say you have to find parenting as a purpose. If you think of parenting as just driving your kids to school to the spelling bee and getting into college and so on, that's just going through the motions. So if you define your purpose as a parent to be passing on a sense of the timelessness of Sanatana Dharma, a sense of vertical continuity. I mean, it's up to them what they keep, what society allows them to keep, what they might fight for, what they might decide. They can put aside, but give them the best shot, because the parents are the schools for millennia. Parents have been the schools, not the government or corporate or Ford Foundation or Carnegie Foundation. Harvard psychologist designed, schools which are not meant, to do anything but, produce zombies, frankly. So parenting with purpose, parents need purpose.
So to summarize, parenting with purpose starts with parenting as a purpose, and putting that in that intergenerational framework. I love the phrase intergenerational empathy, and if I were to summarize, maybe literally purposeful parenting, that would be the purpose of parenting would be to make sure that you give your kids intergenerational empathy so that they see themselves as a part of a vertical continuum, not just ancestors, but also, the impact they're going to have on their kids and their kids and descendants, right?
Yeah.
So when you start to see yourself not just as living your own life within your own day-to-day concerns and goals, and by the way, I think there's also, it's important to differentiate purpose from goals, right? Like having goals at different stages in life, clearly very important. Like I'm going to school, I want to get good grades, then I graduate from school, I want to go, get good education, get a good job. And I think you mentioned it, that that is very important to have different life stages. You have different goals, and you get through them and get on with the next goal and the next set of um, targets that you're achieving. But it is the overall purpose that provides the fundamental context, or so to speak, your why you care about doing those things, right? And I love the phrase that you coined in terms of intergenerational empathy as a defining principle for creating that purpose in life. So uh, is that is that does that resonate, or is that a good summary of what you said?
Yes, yes. I think that's a wonderful note to conclude on, and hopefully our viewers find this conversation useful. And and again, so maybe one takeaway could be that, look for books like this in your library or in your children's school bag, and talk about it nicely with them. Get a conversation going, and ask your children how they feel about it. What are their friends saying? What are their teachers saying? Respect the idealism that they see, but also, get into the process of questioning these narratives together. Okay, so
I think,
yeah.
yeah, no, that's a great point. So maybe, actually, maybe it'll be good if you can summarize, top 3 or 4 takeaways for parents who want to parent with purpose. uh, I don't know, for me what stood out is parenting with purpose starts with parenting as a purpose. So clearly you have to want it, you have to have the intentionality of doing it. Secondly, the idea of placing yourself in this intergenerational vertical context, and having intergenerational empathy as a guiding principle for creating context. But beyond that, like, I love what you just said. So maybe 3 or 4 takeaways and concrete things that uh, parents who are watching this can take away and implement in their life. So what would those be?
Yeah, I'll try to do a pancha parenting thing. One, yeah, discover parenting as a purpose. Second, uh, you know explore the idea of what it means to parent as a footnote or as a part of the flow of Sanatana Dharma, okay, which means Sanatana, eternity, time. Third, cultivate a vertical perspective, cultivate seeing everything in time, each person's life stages, as well as society. Four, uh, question the horizontal bias in today's perspective. Okay, point out how many times our popular culture, our stories, our education is designed to make us think like we are individuals just floating in space, making it seem like we don't have any bond with people who've come before, or worse, thinking of people who've come before as just a problem, or as the sole cause of all the world's problem, from climate change to human rights abuse. That is actually a very big propaganda point. Maybe some other day we should explore it more. I think this sort of horizontal bias has normalized this view that anything old, like when the kids say "Okay, boomer," for example, uh, the past has been weaponized by children. Weaponized in children's minds against them. Okay, to just think that everything is bad in the world, and the parents or the grandparents or everybody who came in the past is to blame. So that has to be questioned and critiqued. And finally, I think the most beautiful thing is intergenerational empathy. And always remember that goes both ways. You know, if you want to encourage our children to be empathetic to us in our age, because they cannot understand. Like I could not understand when, my dad got BP or got a headache or got tired, when I was a kid. Now that I'm in my 50s, I say, oh man, he was probably, tougher than I was, in his 50s and 60s.
Yeah,
So it's
they're
hard
going
for,
through a lot.
yeah, it's hard for a young body to understand what a body over 50 goes through. And conversely, it's also hard, I think, for us to sometimes understand what young people are going to. And that's why it's important to think of parenting as a self-reflexive activity, and not just copy paste what our friends are doing as parents or what our parents are did, but really take it as something, as the most important job we'll play, right? It's a job. I mean, in earlier generations, in earlier times, parenting didn't have to be a job because there was a flow. Your grandparents, parents, everyone lived together. Everyone followed what their elders did. They learned
There was a
craft.
village raising the kid.
There was a village.
We
Yeah,
don't have a village.
we don't have a village. And I think we mistake the weekend, suburban ghetto in the diaspora for a village. Where we get together for samosa or some to watch a Bollywood film. That's hardly a village. So yeah, the fifth point would be intergenerational empathies both ways.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, I learn every time I talk to you, Professor Juluri, and it's such a pleasure to listen to you speak and this amazing ideas and frameworks that you defined and developed that help put so many things in perspective. So thank you so much for your time. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Mittal Garu, and thank you to HISPOLECO as always, and looking forward to more.
Thank you.